We got one more guest. We got one guest, I guess, for this Wednesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, and the number 1 on Twitter, whose work you can hear on VSIN multiple times a week. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hey, Adam. Good to be with you as always. How are you?
Good, man. It's you and I were talking before we started recording here. How busy this time of year is just it's absolutely insane. You had a bunch of NBA games tonight. You had a bunch of NHL games last night. Obviously, a ton of college basketball, Maction, weeknight college football. It's just crazy right now, man. My head's spinning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's easy to get really the big fight here. Not only is to win on your betting, but also to avoid burnout, because you could get burnout really quickly. So that's why probably I'm being a little more choosy, especially like in the NBA early on, because I don't consider that to be one of my better sports. I'm not horrible, but I don't consider that. So I really get selective with that, because you could easily get volume in that and really go south quick.
Well, and that's something too is, and I talked a lot about this in our previous segment, talking about all the different stuff that's going on here. But one thing I didn't really mention is that with so many sports going on, a lot of people really run the risk of putting way too much of their bankrolls in play at this time of the year. And it's very important to keep an eye on that and not overextend yourself, because, not just burnout, like you said, but also the last thing anybody wants to do is be, refilling their bankroll before the holidays.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, it's trying to balance everything. Obviously, we're in the throes of football, and I mean, college basketball, I consider that one of my better sports. So, I mean, I may have a little higher volume with that, but I'm going to be I think within reason, because with a lot of the rule changes, I mean, obviously the 3-point line being moved back to the FIBA line could theoretically affect scoring. But I think more than that, it's really how the officials are going to officiate certain games. I mean, they always have those points of emphasis and this freedom of movement stuff that they try to incorporate or use as an excuse. So like the first game yesterday was Central Arkansas and Baylor. And it's a total mismatch, and Baylor won by 40 plus. But one of the things I noticed yesterday, they were in the bonus like in the first 10 minutes of the game, both teams. So you could really get a lot of fouls. So that's why you got to be careful on some of these totals. And one of the things to use, if you don't like something pre-flop or a number gets away from you and you like an over and it's moved 5, 6, 7 points, you can always wait for a second half. And that's something to use. That actually is what carried me yesterday in college basketball, because we were having an exchange over DM, and I was like, I'm a little down today, and then I eventually ended up ahead of the day because some of the second halves that came later in the card. So that's something that you can always use if you don't get numbers that you like before the game.
Yeah, and something I'll be kind of interested to see here, and I'm trying to run this query right now. I haven't actually seen this out there anywhere, but I'm trying to see, I don't know if you know offhand, maybe you happened to see last night or something like that, how the totals did yesterday in college basketball, because obviously there is that uncertainty about the 3-point line getting moved back. On the other hand, one of the, subsequent advantages to the 3-point line moving back is that it opens up the lane. So teams are probably going to get more high percentage shots at the rim. So I'm kind of curious how the books did the first night in terms of the over-unders and how some of those lines were put together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something I probably need to look at today. I haven't had a chance to do so. But in terms of a lot of these totals, I mean, obviously we saw the two marquee games, and Madison Square Garden both went under the total and went under relatively easily. So, I mean, and I would assume, I mean, people are going to assume, oh, you got two great teams, that the offenses are going to be there. But yeah, they both went easily under the total. But when you have some of these, I guess, lower majors against higher majors, some of the scores can probably get out of hand.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And again, I mean, you want to look at every game in a vacuum and sort of try to figure out what's going to happen in some of these games, because if it's a blowout, for example, and there will be a lot of very high lines in college basketball in the non-conference portion of the year, does that lend itself to an under? Because that team's, going to kind of take its foot off the gas a little bit in the second half. On the other hand, are they just going to keep doing what they're doing, trying to figure out their rotations, run their offense, keep blowing that team out? It's one of the reasons why live betting is such a great innovation here in this industry, and why it really is the future. I mean, I think full game betting, not only is it getting tougher for the reasons I mentioned in the previous segment, where all of our resources like Bill Connolly's S&P, Ken Palm, Bart Torvik, Sagarin, all of these are being used by the books, but just that it's so much harder to beat a full game line because it's almost like there are so many games within the game.
It is. And I mean, and when you have a new season that starts really almost in any sport, but especially now with college basketball just starting yesterday, the players and the bettors are not only unsure of their numbers, so are the bookmakers. And they're obviously going to be just as unsure of their numbers, at least early on, because you simply don't have a lot of the data to go on in terms of what you're looking at going forward, and then obviously making their adjustments in terms of how games are being officiated, how this lane opening up is affecting scoring, how the 3-point line being moved back is affecting scoring. So they're just as unsure of the numbers as we are here early on.
One more thing I wanted to ask you about on the college basketball side, then we'll get into some of the college football and NFL sides that you're going to be betting this week, or that you may have already bet this week. Second halves in college basketball. I know that you like to play a lot of first half, a lot of second half stuff, whether you're looking to play a middle on hope for the 3-0 or at least lock in a 2-1. What is your strategy in terms of second half betting, Wes?
I mean, usually what I'm looking at, I'm trying to kind of look and see where a game closed last night, and the fact that if I couldn't get a number, an example that I did was the Appalachian State against Maryland game, where
Michigan?
Michigan rather, I'm sorry, where Appalachian State took the money, but then all of a sudden they're down 20 at the half, and I think it closed like 16 and a half, I think, or 17. And all of a sudden they're down 21 at the half. So you get 5 for the second half. So now it's almost a 10-point difference. You're getting them plus 26. This is still a Michigan team with a new coach and a new style of play. So I just thought that, hey, look, this team is still going to continue to fight. It's a big game against a big time program at their place, and took eventually plus 5, which is plus 26. Now, I didn't expect they were going to make the game single digits down the stretch, but they ended up doing that. So even though I missed the number early on, I was able to get the second half and get a better number, and it easily ended up covering.
Yeah, it's important to look for those things. And obviously you can look for outlier shooting performances in the first half. But again, looking for those adjusted numbers is important, especially because, I mean, look, not to say that every sharp side is going to be right at this time of the year, and some of them were definitely wrong yesterday, but that was one that took a lot of activity. Not a high-profile game, but Michigan's a very high-profile team. It didn't seem like Michigan was going to continue winning that game by 20 points the whole way. So, yeah, look for those second-half opportunities. They can be very good for you as well. And again, it's one of those things, like I talked about in the previous segment, one of the things I said, Wes, was that everybody's time is crunched so much now with so much going on. You want to look for shortcuts, maybe areas where you can kind of get a quick handicap, so to speak. Second halves give you the opportunity to do that, whether you're watching the game, you check the box score, or you're just aware of the line movement before the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to find different ways, because I mean, there'll be some times where, hey, I look at a board, and whether it's time in your life or whatever, or you've got different things going on, where it's like, you know what, I end up maybe not having a play. But then, if you end up just watching the games in the evenings, you may end up finding something that you wanted to add, even though you didn't like it pre-flop.
All right, so let's transition over to the college football side of things here. We'll stay on the college side for right now, and we'll go to a game I think is a really interesting handicap, a team I'm supposed to know pretty well. Game 139-140, Appalachian State and South Carolina. South Carolina up from 3.5 to as high as 5 out there in the marketplace. I think this hit 5.5 earlier in the week, but came back down a little bit. You're kind of interested in the Gamecocks here. What's your thought process?
Yeah, and this is a little bit of the bubble burst theory, because on the surface you would look and say, okay, Appalachian State, they're getting a chance to play at an SEC school, so certainly they're going to be motivated when you're one of the non-power fives and you get to go play an SEC school that looks pretty even to you. South Carolina is 4-5, and look, they're trying to get bowl eligible, and they still have to play Clemson at the end of the season. So they essentially have to win this game, and then probably have to go to Texas, and then essentially have to go to Texas A&M and pull the upset, because I don't think anybody anticipates that they're going to be Clemson, especially with Clemson being put out there last night as number 5, just outside of the top 4 in the college football playoff rankings. So they're gonna try to run up scores. You already saw the line adjust up to about 32 and a half from the 31 that it opened when they're playing at NC State this week. But Appalachian State, look, they lost at home to Georgia Southern, and I call it the bubble burst because that was their first loss. So now the undefeated is gone. The dreams of potentially being that non-power 5, if you will, that gets in the New Year's Six, which they were certainly live for, along with the Memphises and the SMUs and the Cincinnatis. I mean, Appalachian State was kind of in the mix there, being ranked number 20 in the country last week. So now they got to go on the road to a team that is looking to, I think, salvage the season. And South Carolina has played a very tough schedule. They've already had to play Alabama. They did get the upset win at Georgia, and they've been a Jekyll and Hyde team, because they will upset Georgia and then they lose at Tennessee, who had really been kind of flaming out and struggling. Common opponent here too. Appalachian State did go win at North Carolina earlier this season, a field goal late. They won by 3. South Carolina did lose to North Carolina on a neutral site in Charlotte in the opening week opener, rather. So, yeah, I like the South Carolina side. I think the money is in the right place. I think this is a big game for them, and pretty much they need it to get bowl eligible. So I like the Gamecocks in the spot.
Yeah, I do too. And, you always worry about these non-conference games in the middle of conference play. I mean, we see them, here in the SEC where they play kind of that bye week type of game. This is not that for South Carolina. I mean, this is a legit opponent coming to town. So they're not going to lose their focus like some teams could in a role like this. App State is a very good team. And as you mentioned, they've got to win this game and next week against Texas A&M to get to a bowl, because they are not beating Clemson at home in that finale. At least I wouldn't think so. So, yeah, I completely agree with your stance on that one. The question I have here is, I mean, is this the best we're going to get on this number now, 4.5 or 5? Because it sure feels that way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think, though, that it's going to go to like 6.5 or 7. I wouldn't anticipate that. I think there'll be enough market respect for Appalachian State to kind of keep this within range. But, yeah, you make a really good point there. I mean, this is not like playing an FCS opponent like Clemson did with Wofford last week, where, hey, it's just kind of a get through it game. Don't get anybody hurt. We're probably going to end up playing a lot of players and taking starters out relatively early. I think South Carolina will take these guys seriously and will not look past them, and will look at, hey, this is a real legitimate opponent here, so we need to go ahead and take care of business.
Well, and like I talked about in the previous segment, again, you try to find these things that can be starting points for a handicap, really help you narrow the card down so that you're not trying to handicap 40 games at once. You're getting some starting points, whether it's a situational spot or a mismatch or something that just kind of looks off a little bit. Then you dig deeper into that game, which is exactly what Wes did with South Carolina there in that one. And I feel like you're going to have a similar type of thought here for game 163, 164, East Carolina and SMU. This one is down a little bit from 23.5 to 21, but the barking dog, which the market does like, is also something that's on your mind this week.
Yeah, and in East Carolina, look, they've got the new coach from James Madison, who did win a national championship a couple years ago at the FCS level. now in Greenville for East Carolina. And this is a team that I think is going to be on the upswing. They're not going to obviously get the results they wanted this year, but I think they've been relatively respectable under Mike Houston in his first year. And look, last week they took Cincinnati to the limit. Cincinnati needed a field goal at the end to go ahead and get the win pretty much as time was running out. And so I think you can still sense that a team is playing hard in these games. That mean, even though they're not getting a lot of wins, they're only 3-6, but they go to SMU, and look, we know SMU's offensive numbers are amazing and really good, but that's the other bubble burst theory. You had SMU in that huge game. They were off two huge national TV games. They had the Thursday night game standalone against Houston, where they got by them, but it was a relatively close game against a Houston team that was kind of has had a lot of uncertainty and a lot of drama this year with the Dana Holgerson asking guys to redshirt and whatnot, and then the guy on Twitter, the former player that kind of came out and said, hey, they're openly taking the season. So you still have with the good effort goes on the up giving up 54 points. The national bubble has kind of burst where it's like they were ranked highest as they've been. The program got the death in 1986, and now they lose their first game, and then they have to try to kind of continue the season because the team that's ahead of them now is Memphis, and they lose the tiebreaker to Memphis. So it's like, okay, now we got to get up off the mat the next week to play a team that we're obviously better than, talent-wise, record-wise, statistic-wise, what have you, however you want to categorize it. But now you got to get up off the mat against an East Carolina team that, look, they're still playing hard. Even though they're probably not going to a bowl game, they're trying to set a culture there, and under Mike Houston. So I think East Carolina getting 3 touchdowns or more is still a very good take here.
All right, I've been asking all my guests about this game, so I'm going to do the same with you here, Wes. 167, 168, LSU and Alabama. Alabama anywhere from 6 to 6.5. I guess there's a couple of stray 5.5s out there as well as we try to figure out for sure if we're going to have Tua in this game. Got to ask your thoughts on the biggest game of the year.
Yeah, and I was talking about this game. I was doing a local radio show co-hosting yesterday, and we had Jeff Sherman on from Westgate Superbook USA and talking about this game. And one of the things when you're reading into the price, this is, I think, a very good line because I think you're going to get good two-way action on this game. Because, look, you have, even though they weren't number one in the rankings, they're number one in the polls, number 2 in the CFB rankings. You're having the number one team as an underdog. So when you get an undefeated number one team as an underdog, you're going to see money on that side. And then when you get an Alabama team that is under a touchdown, as low of a spread as they're going to lay all year, then you're going to see money on that side. So this is going to be obviously a high volume game in terms of the ticket count, in terms of the money count that you're going to have. It should be the highest on the board for this college football Saturday. But I think they've got a good line set. And I think if you really look in the line, and I asked Jeff Sherman this, look, Tua is accounted in the line already, really. I mean, they're basically accounting for the fact that, hey, this guy, even though he's a game time decision, he's probably going to play. And you would almost have to assume this is such a big game, biggest game of the regular season, that, look, it's going to take like the Alabama National Guard for Tua not to play in this game. So, yeah, I think it's already accounted for. I don't see, unless bettors just rush to the counter to bet this, I don't see if Tua gets announced to the game that this is just going to all of a sudden go up 2 or 3 points or something like that, because you have LSU with enough support. And I would honestly, Adam, at this point, I would have to lean to LSU, even if Tua is a full go, because, look, Alabama's the more proven commodity, obviously, over multiple years, but LSU, I think, is the more proven commodity this year in the fact that they've beaten some good teams. they have some quality wins. They have as many quality wins as any team in the country. I think still winning at Texas. I know Texas isn't the contender some projected them to be, but you win on the road there, that's still a good win. You beat Florida, that's a good win. You beat Auburn, that's a good win. Alabama's really their best win is probably at Texas A&M, who was kind of hanging on at the bottom of the top 25. And I still think Alabama's really good, but they've dominated LSU in this series. I think they've won, I believe it's 8 straight. But now you're getting a different type of LSU. You're not getting the old LSU of the Les Miles days. You're not getting an LSU that is going to win with running the ball and defense. I mean, we remember those days with single-digit scoring, really, with LSU, Alabama. You're not going to get 10-9 game here or 14-10 or 17-14. You're probably going to get a really high-scoring game in this one. And I think just playing this new offense, even though you have them on film, you haven't played against it on the field. And this up-tempo offense, LSU, that's going to throw it all around the yard, I think that this is a unique challenge for Alabama. Now, I have not bet this game yet or decided or made a decision on it, but at this point, I would be on LSU plus the points.
I think if we get a Tua announcement, this line goes to 7, and I would be surprised if it goes any higher than that. Maybe some of the really public shops, stations out your way, Bovada and the offshore marketplace, maybe they go 7.5, but I think 7 if Tua is announced as the starter. But I wouldn't be surprised to see it come back off of 7 to 6.5 or something like that too. So should be a great game if nothing else. And I agree with you. I think the over is probably the way to go here. But obviously, I mean, that's as public of a play as it gets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 7 would be the high because I just think that there's going to be enough for a book's handle on LSU that it can't be driven more. And when we know the number shoppers on key numbers are going to be like, okay, if I haven't taken it and I'm going to get 7, then you know what? Hell yeah, I'm going to take LSU.
All right, so we transition over to the NFL side, and this is a fascinating handicap here because Cleveland is a 2.5-point favorite against Buffalo. And a lot of people, and we kind of had this discussion already this week on the show, saying, how can Cleveland be a favorite here? I mean, given the body of work for both of these teams, I saw Fabian Sommer, who we know as Suma on Twitter, make a very astute point saying, look, this game tells us what the market thinks of the Buffalo Bills at 6-2. And in fact, some places have gone to 3 on this game, and just about all the 2.5s with extra juice threatening to go to 3 on the Cleveland side. I kind of like Buffalo here a little bit. What am I missing, Wes?
Yeah, and I'm going to actually lean with the Browns here, and would probably and we'll probably end up taking it on a small money line. Look, Buffalo was at least in a little bit of this spot a couple weeks ago. Now, granted, Buffalo was a home favorite, and I mean, we're just outside of our studios at VSIN, and I'm here at South Point, and I'm hearing a conversation. Oh, this Buffalo line is so dumb. This is like the worst line ever. You know, like it's easy money because they were laying 1.5 to the Eagles, Philadelphia, who had just come off that loss in Dallas on Sunday Night Football. And then you all of a sudden had certain players talking to the media and who's the one that was talking to the media. And you had a lot of them kind of sniping at each other. So you had an Eagles team that was looked, at least on the surface, to be in relative disarray. And what do? They come up and lick the Buffalo Bills. And I understand why people would lean to that Buffalo side, and that certainly wouldn't be a bad teaser option to tease through the 3 and 7 to take the Bills and what could be a low-scoring game. Look, Buffalo's defense is legit; it's really good, but they're not a team that puts up a lot of points on the board. I think they only had about 268 yards against a banged-up Washington Redskins defense last week, and now they're going to Cleveland, who just lost to Denver, who was playing basically a first-time starter quarterback in Brandon Allen, and they still couldn't get to win. Everybody's down on Cleveland. The guy, his name escapes me. I'm sorry. The guy that got suspended for his tweets after he was being roasted on Twitter for poor coverage, and then went a little nutso on some people, and then they eventually ended up waiving him, the defensive back. But look, this could be just a rally around, have some kind of rallying cry type of game. And you saw that with the Eagles against the Bills a couple weeks ago. And I think you could perhaps see it with the Browns this week. And look, all the folks that were betting the Browns on the futures market, of course, they're going to go with the results. And I mean, I can't say that I blame them. They were all betting them on the futures in terms of the division, in terms of the AFC, in terms of Super Bowl. Those people have all gone away. So you're not going to get, I think, your casual bettors liking the Browns. They're dead to them now. They're done with them, and they've been burned by them too many times. So they're not going to want to be there. But this is when you might have some of the wise guys, say, okay, perception's low enough on these guys. This would have been based on the market at the start of the year. They would have been over touchdown favorites. Now you're getting them perhaps less than 3. So I think the Browns side probably on the money line is the way to go. And I can't necessarily argue if you want to try to middle and say, okay, I'm going to take Cleveland under 3, and then I'm going to tease Buffalo up through 7. And that way I've got, an 8 or 8.5 or however many point middle on both sides here.
I don't know if it'll find a way to lose, but Buffalo and Detroit on a 6-point teaser looks way too good to be true this week.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I mean, those are the ones that I tease because we sometimes get questions on VSIN about, because I know bettors, because I used to do that. And maybe you used to do it too when you were starting. It's always tempting, I think, to make a team that's a favorite and then all of a sudden tease it and make a team an underdog. But I mean, when you go across those numbers, you get such bad numbers that really don't mean anything. So you're losing value. I mean, when you tease like through 0, because you're getting 1.5, 2, 2.5. So I mean, those aren't key numbers like teasing up or teasing down through 3 and 4 and 6 and 7. So yeah, absolutely. Detroit was one of those that I looked at too, currently sitting 2.5. And plus, with whenever usually that the total gets bet under in a game, what you're seeing kind of in Detroit and Chicago, and you're also seeing here in Buffalo, Cleveland, I always believe that gives a little bit more value to the underdog. So sometimes you can tease a side through a game by just looking at the total.
Well, you said you get a lot of questions there on VSIN. Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the number 1 on Twitter. When can people hear you on VSIN?
Yeah, actually, they can hear me tonight, even though this isn't one of my regular nights. But we had a schedule switch. So 6 to 10, usually on weeknights, 6 to 10 Pacific. That's 9 to 1 Eastern for you night owls out east. And that's the green zone. And that's usually Thursday and Friday, and also on Monday for the Monday night football game. Then on the weekends, Saturday, 2 to 6 p.m. Pacific time for all the college football that's going on. And then 3 to 7 on Sunday night, 3 to 7 Pacific. And usually that's very much in the second half of the late window afternoon games, and then taking you into the Sunday nighter and into Sunday night halftime.
Well, it's like I said, make sure you follow Wes on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. Check him out on VSIN and also in that Point Spread Weekly newsletter presented by VSIN. Wes, we appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks for having me on, buddy. I always appreciate the time.